Welcome everyone to Ceramics Education, Current Contexts and Future Possibilities. Can we go to the next slide? In recent years, degree programs specializing in ceramics at Singapore art schools have been collapsed into broader courses, resulting in limited options for young artists to pursue further studies in ceramics locally. At the same time, ceramics are widely appreciated in Singapore. The use of stoneware and ceramic ware in daily life has resulted in a sense of familiarity and fondness for clay as a material. So why are higher educational programs for ceramics dwindling, given the wide appreciation for this medium? Importantly, what might this mean for ceramic art in Singapore going forward? Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lourdes Samson. I'm one of the curators of Singapore Ceramics Now 2021 Marking Making. I am pleased to have with me our very distinguished panel of speakers, Hans Chu, Nelson Lim, and Jason Lim, who are artists exhibiting in this wonderful exhibition, but are also either arts educators or are currently pursuing further studies in ceramic art abroad. So shall we go to the next slide, please? Okay, so I'd like to introduce Hans, but before that, I'd like to brief the audience on some of the questions that each of the panelists were given in order to frame their presentation. So we asked the panelists to create a presentation for the audience that touched on their first exposure to ceramics as students in Singapore, ways that they are encountering ceramics in schools abroad, and their own experience in the way that ceramics was taught here in Singapore versus their experience in residencies or in educational institutions abroad. So with that, let me introduce our first speaker, Hans Chu. Hans graduated from the School of the Arts in Singapore, majoring in ceramics. He is currently in his second year, studying in Tama Art University, Tokyo, Japan, as a student in the Department of Ceramic, Glass, and Metalworks. Hans's ceramic practice is a contemplation of his different identities as he observes and responds to his physical environment. Since moving his practice to Japan, Hans has adopted the role of a foreigner. As he views and understands his surroundings through his lens, new sensibilities develop. Hans hopes to translate these into his work. Through this process, he gets a clearer understanding of the contradictions, irony, and beauty of Japanese society. I now turn you over to Hans.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm Hans, and pleasure to meet all of you today. As Lou have kindly introduced, I graduated from School of the Arts 5 years ago, and currently based in Japan, pursuing my undergraduate as a second-year student. So for this talk that is based on ceramics education, I hope to share some personal stories on how I have progressed over these 7 years of doing ceramics, from being a student in Sota to my current situation in Japan. Next slide, please. So I started ceramics back in Sota, and during my time, there were specializations, which means we had to choose between ceramics, sculpture, painting, media arts, and design. And I decided to choose ceramics and majored in it for 2 years under the tutelage of Mr. Jason, who's also currently on the panel. And during these 2 years, we are basically under this IB curriculum, International Baccalaureate. And I feel that the strength of this curriculum lies in the fact that it allows us to explore freely whatever we would like to explore and investigate themes we would like to investigate. And hence, there was a lot of agency in terms of pursuing your own interests. And hence, for this series of urns, which I title Urns for the 21st Century, is currently exhibiting Singapore Ceramics Now, were done in 2015. And the picture on the left shows this sketchbook submission, which I've dug up from 6 years ago. So basically, during the International Baccalaureate program, we had to intensely sketchbook our ideas and kind of include pictures as well to illustrate the entire process of how we developed this idea. And I felt that although this was a compulsory graded requirement of this course, I feel that it kind of pushes every student to think deeper into your own process and actually document each and every new thought, every new change and variation within this creation of this artwork. And hence you can see that these were the initial kind of sketches that I did and how it translated into a 3D form. And on the surface of it, I started painting like this kind of motifs, and I kind of jotted down the reason why these are painted on these spots. So I think through this SOTA education, the strength is that it really gives you a good training in this kind of independent thought and expression in a very so-called physical way, in the sense that you have to jot down and include pictures and kind of convince the examiner of your entire process. Right, next slide, please. And this work is also exhibiting currently in the Singapore Ceramics Now. And so this work is actually based on this idea of ready-mades. And this large jar was lying in my house for a pretty long time as an umbrella stand. And one day I decided to kind of react to it by repainting underglaze on the surface and refiring it. And basically the idea is kind of like, as a Singaporean Chinese, I don't really identify with this kind of very traditional blue and white porcelain, and hence reinterpretation of modern motifs on a very traditional vase. And so for each kind of element or process involved in this, it is documented physically into the sketchbook, which I kind of still look through once in a while today. Thank you. Next slide, please. And maybe I'd like to share another project which I did for my graduation show in 2015. And this project was proposed as an installation. I rented a vending machine for a month and sold hand-thrown ceramics in the vending machine. So through this project, although it was pretty ambitious at the time, because it kind of opened my horizons beyond the studio and the gallery space. Because to propose such a project, I had to kind of propose it to the management and kind of get an external company working as the middleman between the school and the external company, and figuring out maybe minor stuff such as insurance and electricity and care for the work and all. So for this project, I kind of, with the help of my friends, managed to pull this through for a month. Next slide, please. So this is actually the interior, or rather the close-up of the product sold in the vending machine. This work basically is, I wanted to convey this idea of this commodification of craft. So it's titled Not Always $2, in response to, how Daiso has this motto, always $2. And they sell very traditional, like Arita ceramics, or like Tokoname ceramics in this international brand called Daiso in many parts of the world for this low price of $2. And in response to that, I wanted to juxtapose this kind of handmade element with this machine that can be operated 24 hours without any human presence. And hence, I decided to choose this way of presenting the work. Right, next slide, please. And these are actually photos that may give you a picture of how the studio looked like back in SOTA as a student. So basically, the tables were communal, so we shared the tables, but each of us were given one shelf, as you can see the picture on the left, the white shelving behind. And you can produce as much amount of work as you can, but kind of put your works back into the shelves. So the works were, it's kind of like a mass production phase back then, where like continuously throw and trim cups, and probably I produced about 300 for this installation. Yep, next slide, please. And these are the cups that have came out of the kiln, glazed, and kind of the last round of inspection before they are being nicely wrapped up and put in the boxes, ready to be presented with, in the vending machine. Yep. Next slide, please. And after I finished SOTA, I finished my national service, and during my time in the army, gave me space and time to kind of rethink and reflect on my future. And I decided to choose Japan for two primary reasons. The first is because I wanted to learn a new language. The second is because of Japan's so-called rich tradition in this area of ceramics. And I studied the language for a year, took the entrance exam, and thankfully I got into this university called Tama Art University in Tokyo. I'm not too sure if many of you have heard of it, but it is a kind of modern art school in Tokyo. Next slide, please. And the reason why I chose this school among the choice of many other art schools in Japan who offer fantastic ceramic programs is because Tama's Tama has a very superior facilities, in the sense that the kilns, they have 14 gas and electric kilns of various sizes. So, I mean, the kilns on the left are electric kilns, and the kilns on the right picture are the gas kilns that we have. And as you can see, I mean, on the picture on the right, they have this crane that goes along the ceiling, so that allows us to transport heavy works and load it into a kiln without having to risk it breaking, maybe like a ton or even 2 tons. So you don't have that kind of like material limitations. And I feel that we simply do not have the access to such facilities in Singapore on a tertiary level. And so that was one reason why I chose to study in Tama Art University. And next slide, please. The second reason is because during my first year in Japan, while I was studying the language, I came across this Japanese artist called Inoue Masayuki, who is currently a professor in Tama Art University. And the first time I came across his works, I was very shocked and like moved by because he basically, what he does is he uses this simple technique of slab building and kind of combines it post-firing to create these complex forms that can be as high as one story, maybe 1.5 stories high, and weigh a couple, like 1 or 2 tons. And I felt that this was the direction I wanted to pursue, apart rather than the kind of very traditional ceramics found in traditional Japanese pottery. And hence Tama Art University. So next slide, please. And maybe from now onwards, I would like to share some projects that I have completed in university during my 2 years there. So the first project I would like to share is this project called 100 kilos. And for this project, we were each given 100 kilos of clay. And basically, there was no requirement to fire the work. So the works can be solid. It doesn't have to be hollow. It can be wet. And basically, you are kind of relief of all these material limitations in so-called fired ceramics, like when you have to dry it and put it in a kiln and glaze it and then put it in the kiln for the second firing. And hence, it really opened my so-called approach to ceramics, where it actually there's no necessity for it to be fired if you can convey what you want to convey. And from the pictures, you can see that, so basically the classroom, you can use any part of the classroom. So some people choose to use the beams on the walls, while some people choose to work on the table and kind of introduce like other materials like such as bamboo. And it kind of, yeah, as I said earlier, it's kind of opened my understanding of what ceramics is in a very refreshing manner, which I really enjoyed this project. So yeah, next slide, please. And the second project I would like to share is this project called Beyond Sight. Basically, they conducted this workshop in a huge gallery, open gallery space with a ground sheet, and we were each given a blindfold each and kind of one packet of clay, maybe 20 kilos, and we had to so-called feel our way without the sense of sight, and just interacting with the clay with using your both hands, and finally observing what you have created based on this sense of touch. So the work that I did for this project is the picture on the right, basically kind of like this worm like form that is elevated from the ground with a few foots. And there's no reason behind why this work was created, but my kind of learning from this project is working on the table as compared to working on the floor is two different experiences. And working on the floor, you have a lot more freedom with the space, and you kind of relieve a lot of constraints, and hence this long organic kind of form emerged from like just squishing clay on the ground. And I think at this point in time, I realized that the Japanese art education system is very different from what I experienced in Sota, because back in Sota, it was highly grounded in your own thinking, your own concepts, and this process of sketchbooking. But coming to Japan, the emphasis on materiality, kind of like how you interact with the material, as seen from these two examples that I've raised. And so I kind of adapted myself to this new education system. So next slide, please. And this is the final project that we did last year actually, where it's called clay test piece. Basically, we mix raw materials that are used commonly for mixing glazes into clay itself directly. And the pieces are, so basically the pieces are fired at 4 different temperatures with 4 different types of clay and 2 different firings. So at the end of the day, you have a huge database of kind of 8 to 10,000 pieces of these small test pieces. They're lined along the corridor. And with this database, we kind of use the data and create your own artwork. So this was the gist of this project. And hence, as you can see, like for example, on the picture on the right, the middle panel, the green panel, has this slight variation of greens from the very pale to the very strong green, which is, this material is actually chrome oxide. So it produces a green effect. But with this rigorous testing, you get a very clear specimen of the different gradations of this green that it can offer. And hence with this data, we are able to kind of explore and make use of what we have into our works. Next slide, please. And so this is actually what I did for this project, what I submitted. Basically, I decided to make stools that kind of has human emotions, or rather kind of like, for example, a stool that seems like it's walking or slumping, or handicapped stool, something like that. And for example, the blues or the browns or the beiges are created using the data that we have accumulated over the past 2 months. Yeah. And I think the amazing part of this project is because is the fact that everyone works together to produce these 8,000 test pieces. It's not an individual effort, obviously, and hence we are able to get this amount of data. If I were an individual artist practicing alone, I wouldn't bother to create. It's realistically impossible to create something with so much variations in 2 months. And hence, I think this was a very meaningful project. And next slide, please. And apart from, learning ceramics in an institution, which I felt really, back when I was in Japan, I felt very limited by the fact that, we are given all these themes to work on, compared to back in SOTA where we had to propose ideas. So I kind of, to feel this kind of want to learn more, I decided to make use of my holidays in Japan to work and volunteer in this kind of traditional pottery towns in Japan. And this area is called Mashiko. It's north of Tokyo, which is like 4 hours away from my university. And in 2019, I went over to Mashiko for a month, working in the pottery studio. And kind of after that month spent there, I learned how they fire the wood kilns there. Because in the city, it's very difficult, or it's impossible to fire a wood kiln because of the black smoke and carbon emissions. And hence you have to go to the countryside. And going to this countryside, after spending a month there, we kind of get to know the community better. And after a while, whenever they fire the kiln, they would invite me over. If you are free to help, why don't you come to Mashiko and you can spend 2 weeks at our place? And through this kind of like interaction and dialogue with the local artists, I think I learned a lot of lessons that cannot be taught in school, cannot be taught from my professors. So this is, taking your education is your own owner. So making use of my holidays to try to explore, learn things that I want to learn. And on the picture on the right is basically, in this pottery town, they organize biannual pottery fairs. So going to these fairs, you get to see potters and all the other kind of styles in this common space, which is it was very educational to me. Yeah, next slide, please. Yeah, so this picture is the kiln we fired in 2019 during winter, and it's called Anagama kiln, basically a whole duck. It translates to basically a whole duck in a slope. And the picture on the right illustrates how the kiln is packed. So it's a really long kiln, like a tunnel. Yep. And next slide, please. This was another place in Japan called Shigaraki, somewhere near Kyoto, central Japan, where I spent just a short 10 days working as an intern there in 2020. And coming here, this place offers a residency program for international artists. So half the residents are Japanese, half the residents are international artists. And through that, they offer this common studio, common place of living for the Japanese people, artists, to interact with foreign artists and create work at the same time. So being here, I saw like, whoa, actually there are kilns much larger than the ones they have in our school that require, forklifters to load works into the kiln, and how such huge heavy works are being loaded. And as you can see, the kind of scale of the works on the right, which are left out in the yard. Yep, next slide, please. And this town is also famous for tanuki, which is basically raccoons. So they mass produce raccoons for the entire Japan. And it's a huge traditional pottery town, and hence they still continue this tradition of making these figurines using slip casting and firing them in a climbing kiln, as you can see on the right, where the huge tanukis are being loaded on kiln shelves. So although I don't kind of study traditional Japanese pottery techniques, but I hope to use my time in Japan to kind of explore both the contemporary side of Japanese ceramics in this institution, Tama Art University, and making use of some free time to maybe explore the countrysides, because Japan is littered with so many pottery towns that produce so many different types of yakimono, which is pottery, and hence just going down into the factories, going down into the workshops to understand their processes is a very rewarding experience for me in Japan. Yep, I think that's all from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hans. Okay, now I'd like to move to our second speaker, Nelson Lim. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So Nelson Lim was born in 1975. He pursued a diploma in the fine arts at the Nanyang Academy of Fine Arts and has an MFA in Applied Arts program in ceramics at Tainan National University of Arts. He is currently an adjunct lecturer in Fine Arts program at Nanyang Academy of Fine Arts, or NAFA. His passion for ceramics saw him taking part in local exhibitions since his student days, and he continues to show internationally in Asia and North America. He has won many awards for his explorative and inventive technique in ceramic making. Nelson had his first solo exhibition in 2017 in Taiwan, and his work, which is shown at Singapore Ceramics Now, Construction of Memories, is the largest ceramics artwork ever exhibited in the museum to date. So welcome, Nelson.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Lou. Right. So, yeah, first, the next slides, please. All right, so just a very brief introduction of myself. And before I start my presentation, I really like to thank Jason Lim for organizing everything, and also Sid. It's really, I think, like for the past years in Singapore, right, we never see such big ceramic exhibitions. So I think it really make an impact this time around. So thank you, Jason. Thank you, Sid. Right. So I start my practice 1991. I enrolled into NAFA. That time, my first year was multimedia, which is during that time is the most in subject. So during the first year, we actually have to learn all the minor, okay, the electives. So I learned ceramics under Peter Low. And after the first lesson, I actually asked him, can I come back to practice more, because it's really so interested to me. So he said that, well, you can come in anytime if you are free. So for that week on, right, every time I don't have other subject, I will just go into the studio and he will teach me. So, and towards the end of the semester, where we really have to confirm our major, then I switched from multimedia to ceramics. So in the second year, actually, I majored in ceramic, and during that year, I'm the only major ceramic student. Yeah. And then I graduated in 2001. And after my graduation, I started teaching in some primary schools and also secondary schools. So all the way been teaching until 2013. Okay, I was busy with life, but then I never sort of like stopped my practice. Every time I'm free, I will go back to either NAFA or I go to Peter Low's studio in Kota Tinggi. Later on, I will show you some photos of his studio. So in 2013 to 2018, I was at Taiwan doing my MFA. and then all the way until now. Yeah, I came back like 2 years ago and then start practicing and also teaching at NASA. Next slide, please. All right, so this is Peter Lowe's studio in Kota Tinggi. He got a really very nice studio. All right, and this is the next slide. Right, so this is the surrounding, really big studio, fully equipped, and then yeah, it's like in the middle of the forest, and it's very near to the Kota Tinggi waterfall, which is quite famous. So it's really very nice environment where you can just stay there for days and to do ceramics. Okay, next. Right, so this is the interior of the studio. Perhaps some of you have visited him before, and sometimes we do organize wood firing or sagger firing trip to his studio. Okay, next. All right, so in 2013, after like many years teaching, and then, you know, I want to improve what I know in ceramic knowledge. So I enrolled into this Tainan University of the Art, right? At first was recommended by Thomas Chong and Hui Ming. Okay, so they went there first. They are actually two years my senior. Okay, I'll just show you the next slide, the surrounding. Okay, the program is under Professor Zhang Qingyan. So he's my mentor, and he's the one who planned the program. And one thing I choose this university is because it's like so compact, so good. Later I will tell you more. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so the university is surrounded by the paddy field. This is one of the photo where I go for my run every morning around the school. Next slide. Okay, so every student will get a space like this, and then you can do everything in there. Right, next slide. Okay, so one thing good about the program is at any time there will be guest artists that visit our studio. Okay, these are some of the artists that visited, and then they usually stay from 1 month to 3 months. So it's actually a very good way where the student can interact with all these famous ceramic artists, and then to learn from them and interact with them. And every time we have critique sessions, right, they will be involved and giving the students critique. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, this is Yorigami-san, famous Japanese ceramist who teach us sagger firing. All right, next. So this is Mr. Sukupa. So he's a artistic director of Arctic Play Center, so in Portia, right, Finland. Okay, he specialized in slip casting and mold making. So he also all the guest artists will actually do some workshop and demonstration. Next slide. Okay, we also have exchange students from different overseas universities. So this is one of the group of students, and the lecturers wearing in blue is Mr. Lee In-chin, a very famous porter in Korea. Next. Okay, so the school, right, has all sorts of facilities like full equipped, big kiln, and this clay mixing machine, right, is where I make all my porcelain slip. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, over in Taiwan, there's actually a lot of things to explore. So for my almost 4 years there, right, I do nothing but just exploring the media clay. And also I like to mix just beside clay and with other medium. So this is the dry straw that I collected from the paddy field. And yeah, I just not sure how will it become, and then I just mix, and then I do my experiment. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is the result from the porcelain I mixed with the straw. Next slide. And then this is the beginning of my explorations with metal and clay. Okay, so I just found some loose metal wire, and then I just dip it with the porcelain slip. Next slide, please. Okay, drying. And then next slide. Yeah, this is the effect. So it actually opens up to this whole series of work that I mix metal and porcelain slip. Okay, next slide, please. Right, for over there in Taiwan, right, we have all the facilities, all the big kiln, you know. I tell myself like, okay, this is the only opportunity that I can do some really work that I want, because in Singapore, you don't get to fire like, you know, such big kiln or big work. So when I was like planning for my final year project, I didn't think of, okay, after I finish with the exhibition, where I'm going to keep all this work. I just have the idea, I just want to do and, you know, like fulfill my dreams. So this is the porcelain slip that I made over there. This is one of the big bucket. It's like almost 120 kg of clay slip. Okay, next. Yeah, still exploring with different forms, different shape, and different kind of metal. All right, next. So this is the firing artwork after fire. So I hang the artwork out on the ceiling as for display. I want to have that kind of suspension, but with the very heavy weight. Okay, next. Right, this is the kiln where I fire the work, like the work that I exhibited in Singapore Ceramics Now, also fired in this kiln. And this is part of all the artwork there. Okay, for this kiln, every time I can fire about 40 pieces. And every time it takes, for the firing, it takes one whole day from morning. Like I always start very early, like 6, all the way until at night, about 11. Okay, next. Yeah, so going through so many experiments, right? Like experience with the firing, the different temperature. These are the works that actually melted at the site. So it took me about 3 to 4 kiln firing to get the temperature right. Okay, next. Yeah, so this is my final year project. It's one of the installation in our school exhibition hall. Right, next. And then, yeah, one thing good also about this program is like we always have the ceramic sales. Okay, students will make their work, like this is all through our practice. So besides very contemporary ceramic work, we also do like more functional. And every time the students will put up the news on FB or social media, and collectors from all over Taiwan, they will come. And because they know that these are really good and quality work. And besides students' work, right, like the guest artists will also contribute. They make their work and they sell there. And really, gallery collectors or owner, they will come specially down to buy because they know they are getting really good deal. And a lot of the gallery owner will buy and then sell maybe double or triple back in their gallery. Okay, next. Okay, so yeah, Peter Low visit me 2016. I was really happy. Yeah, so this is just a very quick brief of my practice in ceramics.
Thank you, Nelson, for sharing all of that. I'd like to, before we listen to our next speaker, I'd like to invite our audience members to please ask questions to our panelists in the Q&A box below your screen. Feel free to ask questions from all of our panelists, and we will select a few later on during the Q&A session. So I'd like now to turn the floor to our next speaker, Mr. Jason Lim, who is also the Artistic Director of Singapore Ceramics Now. Next slide, please. So Jason was born in Singapore in 1966. He has a BA degree from Central St. Martin's College of Art and Design and an MA from the Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology through the LaSalle College of the Arts. He is also an arts educator at the Faculty of Visual Arts at the School of Arts in Singapore. His repertoire of works encompasses ceramics, photography, installation art, and performance art, and he has organized and created various platforms for alternative art practitioners to meet and collaborate. As a performance artist, he has been invited to present performances in more than 20 countries. In 2007, he presented his work Walking Sticks at the 4th World Ceramics Biennale in Korea, winning the Jurors Prize. And also the same year, he also presented Just Dharma and Lightweight at the Singapore Pavilion of the 52nd Venice Biennale. As a ceramicist, his works have been collected and commissioned by various public museums, art institutions, corporate companies, and private collections, both locally and internationally. So I welcome Jason Lim.
Sorry, I was on mute. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us in this session. I was just gonna go kind of not so much about my, well, maybe something about my education background, and because I'm of that age where I don't have a lot of documentation of my education time, because during my time of studies, we don't have the digital age, we don't have the mobile phone to document every single moment of our life. So I'm just gonna go very quickly of how I started in encountering ceramics. My first encounter with ceramics was I was in doing my O levels. That was at St. Patrick's School, and this was also the birthplace of LaSalle College of the Arts. During the time was LaSalle was still known as St. Patrick Art Center. It was a very small, humble art center, with just maybe 2 or 3 classrooms at the back of the school building. I would be like walking past the studio, and that was when I first encountered a student there recycling clay. But I wasn't brave enough to go in to ask what are those materials. What I saw was just very muddy material lying on top of some white plaster board. And I guess they were, I mean, now I know they were recycling the clay, and that was what I saw. 2 years later, I was doing my A-level arts, and then that's where I first really used clay to make ceramic, or at the time I was just making pottery work. Doing my A-level art, and craft was one of the paper that I took. So I started making functional wares as my A-level submission in the craft paper. I think well, many people would see the army as a kind of like two years of wasting their life away, but I felt that the army days for me was really good, because I have 2.5 years to actually thinking about what I really want to do after I get out of the army. And during those days when I was in the army, of course, we don't have emails. It was just snail mail. A few of my female friends who don't have to do the army has gone overseas study. Some did art, and that time was really good for me. When I booked out of the camp, the first thing I rushed to was a letterbox, opening up the letterbox to see what news my friends overseas has brought to me. So um, they're always sending me flyers of exhibition, things that is images of postcard of what they saw in the museum. That really kind of made me set my mind about going to do my education overseas. That the cultural landscape in Singapore during that time in the mid 80s was still I guess Singapore was still kind of labeled as the cultural desert. There isn't much happening. So going to overseas was a really eye-opening experience for me, especially in the art education. Um, in Singapore, we all know that we all have to call our teacher by Mr. So and so. But the first real culture shock for me when I was in London was the teacher actually asked me to call them by their first name. This is like unspoken of, nobody does that in Singapore, calling the teacher by their first name. But for me, that's such a great way to be as a kind of icebreaker to break the barrier between um, teacher and student. So you don't have the barrier, and then I feel that I have no I feel more comfortable in asking questions. When you call somebody by the first name, it's almost like a friend to you. Whatever advice you want to get is a bit more approachable in that sense. So I have kind of like adopted that informality in teaching. When I came back to Singapore to teach, I was doing part-time teaching in LaSalle when I came back in 1992. And for like 10 years, I was doing part-time teaching. Um, I would just say to the student, call me Jason, and then we have this a very good relationship between student and teacher. I tend to go just do tutorial outside of the classroom situation, bringing them to like just do tutorial consultation at the coffee shop where you can really feel more relaxed, have a cup of coffee, and just talk about artworks. So that's how I brought my experience overseas as a student back to be a teacher in Singapore. Right now right now I'm teaching in School of the Arts, and the closest informality I can have with my student is to ask them to call me Mr. Jason rather than Mr. Lim. But some of them still feel that they should call me Mr. Lim, but that's fine with me. But having students call me Mr. Jason is kind of like almost they're addressing me by my first name, and then I feel that they are a little bit more less shy to ask questions when they do that. So this, I guess, in order to have a kind of student teacher relationship where knowledge can transfer better, we should really have this breaking of this traditional barrier between teacher and student. Can we have the next slide? One of the best experience for me in my time as a practicing artist making ceramic work will be in this place called European Ceramic Work Center. It's located in Holland, about 2 hours south of Amsterdam. This ceramic center is open to everyone who are interested to use ceramic to produce work. You don't need to have previous experience to apply. They have very skillful technicians to guide you with your ideas and concept. And all the technicians are also practicing artists themselves. It's a very highly, I mean, it's a residency that a lot of artists would like to go. And also in this residency, they only would let you do the residency like twice in your lifetime. So I've already used up one. I've got one more chance left. Next slide, please. In ceramic practice, I guess we all our work are determined by the kind of kiln size that is available, the kind of facilities that's available for us. So in this space, there are 20 over kilns of different shapes and sizes. All are fully automated, and they are gas kiln of a computer program. And next slide, please. So they have one of the biggest kiln in Europe. That white object you see there is a top loader kiln. It means that the white section would be can be raised up. So that middle part where the silver cylinder is like the hydraulic that you hoist the whole shell of the kiln upwards. So this kiln enable you to make something about 2.5 meter tall. You can make a 2.5 meter piece of work in there, and then it's fired with natural gas. It's just a kind of studio that every ceramist would dream of. I'm sure like um, Nelson and Hans has been talking about kiln facilities and all that. That both of them can relate. I can see that perhaps you're also drooling over the use of this kiln. So for me, every residency is a kind of a challenge. It challenges me to how to make full use of the facilities that's available. And I see all this challenge as a continuing kind of education and learning as an artist. So for me, of course, I had used this kiln, the huge kiln. I make a 2.5 meter piece, but of course with shrinkage and all that. When it came back out of the kiln after the firing, it was a 2 meter tall column that I produced. So next slide. Another interesting kind of learning experience, learning as we go along in our art practice, is always trying something. And this work, it was called Just Dharma. It's the work that was presented in the 52nd Venice Biennale. When I first visited the site, the whole building was just full of chandeliers in each room. And these chandeliers are all very highly decorated with Murano glass. They're all with European flower motif of the tulips. The wall of the buildings are made of cloth. It's basically fabric partitions. So when you push onto the wall, it's soft. You can never hang anything on the wall. So for me, I thought this is such a powerful place. Everything is already in their place. I don't feel that any artwork that I make will be able to challenge the existing space. So my original proposal to have an installation in this space, I have to kind of like just throw them out into the Grand Canal and really rethink about what can I do for this site. So on the way back to the plane, on the way back to Singapore in the plane, I was making sketches and start thinking about how to make a piece of work that can be appropriate for this space. So I was thinking, since there are already so many chandeliers, no harm making another one. You can't beat them, join them. So I started to conceptualize a chandelier that I want to make, an organic shape one, not a symmetrical chandelier that we used to know. Thinking about what kind of motifs that I want to use. So the lotus became the motifs, flower motifs for this chandelier. So this chandelier is basically about 4 meters long, about 2 meters in diameter. It's strung up with about 2,000 porcelain, ceramic porcelain lotus flowers. Out of the 2,000 flowers, I think it's like 500 of them are fitted with light bulbs. On the opening day of the exhibition, I did a short performance of playing around with the lights, and then at the end, kind of release a hanging button and let the whole chandelier drop. The idea behind it was because when I was thinking about the work, kind of like researching on the meaning of lotus flower ties me in with the Buddhist belief of reincarnation, life, death, and rebirth. So making the work is kind of like giving form and shape to the work, and playing with the lights is like to give life to the chandelier. And then finally crashing it in a way is the death and destruction. But at the same time, the rebirth of the work came true from people who have not seen the actual work, but have heard about what happened. And usually when you hear about what has happened and then you talk, and then you spread the news to other people. It's like a Chinese whisper. At the end, you get a very totally different story from what actually happened to the work. So that reincarnation of work became many different versions. Kevin, the next slide. This is a picture of Gaia Ceramic Center. This is another residency that I did in Ubud, Bali. In this ceramic center, actually this one is not in the center, but it's a factory. When I was there, I was the first artist to be invited to do a residency for the center, and the center was still halfway being built. So I was housed in the actual factory space to create my own work. I find that doing residency is not just about making use of facilities, but also to know the people in the space. So in Bali, because I was situated so close to the local artisans there, I have a lot of contact time with them. Compared to other residency, usually you're given your own studio space, you're kind of isolated from everybody else. So this is quite a unique space for me, where I get to make my own work at the same time looking at the local artisans making those works that are in a way mass produced. So there's a kind of mass production area going on. At the same time, my work area is just producing one-off sculptural objects. So getting to know the community is one plus point for me of going to do residency, because I know the culture in a more intimate way, not through a touristic point of view. Seeing spaces or places where the locals hang out. This for me is really a kind of additional value added kind of experience in doing residency. Next slide, please. When I first came back from London in my studies, I came back as a young artist. I came back as an artist or a new graduate who is full of bank loan debt, education debt. So I don't have the means to actually start a ceramic studio or have any financial support to buy equipment that is required of a functioning ceramic studio. So I spent a lot of the first 3 years actually continuing to make ceramic work, but they remain unfired. Those first 3 years are very important kind of foundation time for me, starting off as an artist in Singapore, trying to find my way to fit back into the cultural landscape in Singapore during that time. So I was spending time in my kind of my bedroom with a 1 by 1 square meter floor space, making ceramic unfired, applying colors onto those ceramic pieces using acrylic paint, and then kind of like rubbing the ink or the paint into the clay body, and then spraying some kind of wax on it and polishing it to give it a kind of sheen, to almost trying to imitate a traditionally fired ceramic piece. In those days, I kind of actually, after about 3 years of doing this unfired works, I come to terms with that I'm now a maker using clay, and I'm not a ceramist making clay. So that actually frees me up a lot to the attitude that I have with the clay as a material. And I guess things have kind of like come into a full circle, where recently a few of my performance work involved making clay in real time as a performance installation work. So what you see here is a piece of work. It's an installation called Encounter Under the Banyan Tree. It's a durational piece where I'm in the gallery space for 6 hours each day for 6 days, and each day I'll continue to make this object, which hopefully has captures the essence of the banyan tree. This is, I guess, probably on the second day. For me, I work a lot with rhythm, momentum, and repetition. And in this case, I'm just rolling a lot of coils, building building this work up from scratch, from ground upwards. I tend to leave a lot of my markings, finger marks on the work in a way that hopefully um, audience can kind of reconstruct or reimagine the kind of labor and rhythm or momentum that goes on into making the work. So I guess if, because it's done in the duration of 6 days, different segment of the work kind of records my different momentum of each day. Next slide, please. So this is almost towards the end of the building. I think this will be like the 5th day. So it has grown quite a bit from the 2nd day to now. One of the ideas in this piece is also to intentionally wear white in a way so that I try to be as clean as possible at the same time working with clay. It's kind of like a crazy idea, you know, trying to be clean but working with some clay, especially in terracotta. So in that way, people ask me, why do I wear white? In a way, it becomes, I give myself a certain kind of restriction in terms of how my body posture is like, how the performance element is there. When I try to be wearing white at the same time not leaning onto the work, it becomes an unusual position that I have, an unusual posture that I have to take when I build the piece of work. Next slide, please. So this is the finish of the piece. This is after 6 days. The exhibition kind of carries on for another two or 3 weeks. What happens in this is that at the end, everything, of course, gets dry up. The clay are destroyed and recycled. But if audience has experience of visiting this work on the first day and also on the last day, they would notice that the color of the work has changed from a darker brown to a lighter brown because the clay has dried up. And the smell of the space also changed because when there's a lot of clay in the environment, we can actually smell earth, smell clay in the environment. And then towards the end, we might smell a little bit more dusty because things has dried up. And since the clay has dried up, bits and pieces also starts to fall off the piece. So it's almost like in a kind of a self-destruction through time. So the work is not just about me doing the 6 days performance, but the work is also about how the material will behave in the duration of the exhibition. That means in the 20 days, the clay will also have its own life, an ongoing process of a living organism, a living material. I think that's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to all our panelists for talking. And now I will ask some questions of them. I will also include some of the questions that were asked by our audience members. So let me just start with one of my questions, which was, there is a long established tradition of apprenticeship in ceramic production, which allows basically artists to train under a master potter to learn techniques and, more importantly, attitudes and approaches to art making. With the lack of specialized higher educational programs in ceramics in Singapore, do you think that this tradition might be revived to facilitate the imparting of technical skills? Why or why not? Maybe I can start with our master, Jason Lim, for this question.
Okay, for me, I really feel that every person learns in different ways. Some people like to learn with no instructions. Some people like to learn with the master knocking a ruler on their knuckle, you know. So for me, it's good to learn from master if you really believe that's the way for you to learn. And it becomes really detrimental for someone to learn if they are not the kind that disciplined enough to follow instruction all the time. So in life, it's the same. We learn from different ways. Some people learn the hard way. Some people learn from just being told not to do it.
True. Nelson, how about you? Do you think that this tradition might, were you an apprentice under Peter Lowe, for instance?
Yeah, I am. So for many years, and like every weekend, I will follow him to his studio in Kota Tengah. So I will do like in the beginning, the very basic, like wedging of the clay, recycle, so all the way until. But I feel that he is good in a way that he don't restrict or just ask me to do what he want. So he will give me the freedom, but he just teach me the technique and then let me express using the clay as a medium, which is, I think, very good. Yeah, as a apprenticeship.
Yeah. How about you, Hans? Would you be open to an apprenticeship learning experience?
I think I would refuse an apprentice learning experience because of the education I received so far. And for example, back in school, in university, they do not teach, although they have a wheel throwing class, they do not teach you how to throw on the wheel, how to make functional wares. But rather, they teach you how to switch on the wheel. And then you're free to explore and kind of learn by trial and error and discover your own ways of working with this material or maybe this machine. And hence, even for coiling, which is just a basic technique, right? They do not teach you, for example, step one, you create a base and then you start by coils and then blending up the coils. But rather, maybe he would say something like, oh, I intentionally choose not to teach you this method because this is my method. And I'm afraid like all of you, a class of 20 would just blindly follow my method. And hence, I think the kind of emphasis on finding your own way of working with clay and this technique is important.
Okay. My second question is, how does the inclusion of ceramics into broader multidisciplinary programs impact ceramic art in the future? Are we seeing more innovation because of it, or does it discourage more young artists from focusing on ceramics? Jason, what do you think?
I think that especially so for ceramics, there's a really strong need to master the foundation. So if a coursework is kind of like watered down, then the student may not have a strong foundation in order to develop a kind of more advanced work that they have intention to make. So definitely it's a little of a disadvantage if the coursework is watered down and everything is just under the 3-dimension kind of a faculty and there isn't a specialization.
Nelson, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I have the same feeling as well because in where I teach, right? So not just I think in Singapore, but happen around the world, they are going into generalizations where the students get to learn more things. They want the students to learn a lot of things. So, but then ceramic is something very specialized, right? So even in the program right now, the students have limited studio times to practice, which I think is not really good. Yeah. For the development of ceramics in Singapore.
How about you, Hans? Any thoughts on this particular issue?
I think I agree with what Jason and Nelson has spoken about how ceramics is such a physical, but I mean practice that you have to put in the hours, you have to put in the time, and you have to have the kind of physical space to produce ceramics.
Yep. I also want to add on that perhaps it's okay if the level of education at that time maybe is at a pre-tertiary level. Then the student can actually have more time to experience different art making forms. But then when it goes to at the tertiary level, then perhaps there should be that kind of specialization going on. I think, yeah, actually it also depends on at what level those subject or ceramics are being taught.
Right, right. Um, how do you think we can tap on the enduring popularity of ceramics to encourage more young students to pursue it as a profession if right now our educational system doesn't provide them enough opportunities to specialize in ceramic art, for instance? Is there a way that we can develop a stronger community of practitioners in ceramic arts in Singapore?
I think for me, organizing this exhibition has the intention. It's creating a platform for different schools of thoughts being involved. I mean, in the curation process, I try to be as inclusive as possible. Cross-generational artists are being invited in the show. Artists with training or without training are also invited in the exhibition, and different approaches of art of ceramic making are presented in the exhibition. So I hope that, I mean, in this platform, we hope to open certain doors and aspire and inspire younger makers to continue with their practice. So I guess other than just outside school, I mean, during the school teaching, we encourage students to continue. But on the outside of the school environment, the artists and the community really needs to help along in promoting this form.
Yeah. Nelson, any ideas?
Yeah, I can see like now there are many ceramic studio opening up in Singapore. So yeah, it's getting so popular. I think for students, those who want to specialize, there's a lot of space for them compared to our time. So for those who want to do ceramic as a profession, then I would encourage keep on practicing. You know, like don't give up. And with social media nowadays, right, they can expose their work more easily compared to the past. Yeah.
Hans, what words of wisdom can you impart to young students, like younger than yourself, who want to pursue ceramics? Like, should they follow your path and pursue ceramics abroad?
Okay, these are not words of wisdom, but I would really strongly encourage everyone who are thinking of pursuing ceramics to take a step out and go overseas to experience what other cultures have to offer and see their ceramic traditions. Just I guarantee you that you'll be moved by the amount of technique, the amount of exploration that they can achieve. And hopefully one day Singapore can achieve that as well.
I'm going to take now a question from the audience. The sharing so far have talked about ceramics in isolation. Were there any external influences that have greatly impacted your work or wished that were included in the curriculum that you underwent? So are there any influences that you wish the curriculum that was offered in your institution should have encompassed, or weren't offered at that time, but perhaps now they are included?
For me, when I was a student in London, the college is situated very near to the British Museum and also to the V&A. So going to these places helps helps me with drawing inspiration from looking at museum pieces, looking at antiquities. These are the foundation of how where ceramic comes from, looking at the old stuff. Some old stuff look very, even up to now, look very contemporary. So those are very important reference places where I can find inspiration and reference from. So as a educator in Singapore, I find it's quite lacking for students to be able to go to a museum to look for ceramics. It's, especially contemporary ceramics. We were discussing about there is actually lack of that presentation of contemporary ceramics in Singapore, except for in museum we see some shipwreck kind of things that's being dug up, but apart from that, there's not much else we can find ceramic references for students who are interested in ceramics. So yeah, that's for me. That's kind of situation now in Singapore. There's a problem. We want to bring students to the museum, but all they can see are just some old works, but no reference to the contemporary, to the art work that are done by artists now.
Mm. Nelson, any thoughts?
Yeah. So I'm greatly influenced by the passion of Peter Loh, because like before COVID, right? All I know, every weekend without fail, he would just go in and continue. So that kind of passion, like so strong towards like doing something is really a great influence for me. And then when I travel overseas to take part in Biennale or symposium or a lot of exhibition, I can see this group of people who work with clay, right? I mean, they are so passionate, and everyone got its own story. And yeah, of course, like Jason mentioned, there are so many like galleries or an exhibition to see. So I feel what we lack in Singapore is things like that. Like I hope more gallery in Singapore will showcase whether is it like traditional ceramics or contemporary ceramics. Yeah.
Hans, can you share about any other external influences that might have helped you in your journey as a ceramic artist?
I think for me, the external influences I kind of gained inspiration from is my everyday life in Japan as a foreigner, and the many barriers language-wise or cultural-wise that I face. That kind of influenced my work as I look back based on my works in Sota as compared to my works based now in Japan. I think I'm heavily influenced by this environment that I'm in.
Another question that I have here is that would you say that the limitations that you see to ceramic education, such as kilns, the scale, the focus of education, are strictly monetary or due to tradition? What gaps do you feel non-institutional spaces might fill in Singapore?
It's a big question. Perhaps it's not really I don't know. I haven't really think through this question. It's quite difficult to just give you to the audience a direct. Because I think there are from my experience there are a lot of kilns going in a lot of schools in Singapore. But from what I know as well that a lot of the kilns are not used because there's nobody there to know how to use it. There's not enough training for art teachers to teach ceramics. So after 5 years, the kiln are kind of sold a second-hand kiln, which are new kilns back to the supplier. That's how I know about what's happening with the ceramic education in Singapore. No, there's a budget to buy all this thing. We have the hardware, but we don't have the software to run it.
True. Nelson,
yeah, because I teach in I do have a sort of company to run ceramics program in primary schools. So I know there are some schools, right? They depend very much on the principal. So, and some schools are really good, like they emphasize very much on the art education, and they want ceramics to be part of the program for the children, like can be from P3, primary 3 to all the way to primary 6. So we should encourage more of that into our national like art education, like put ceramics into it from young, and then like teach the students the aspects of ceramics, the knowledge, and let them understand more. Yeah, actually, a lot of schools, they have good facilities like what Jason mentioned, but maybe there's not enough like good instructors to go around and teach. Yeah.
Okay. I think I'll ask my last question. This is from an anonymous attendee. Ceramicists and potters are renowned for their ability to deal with failure, as shared in an article by Casey Lesser from Artsy in 2018. How do you deal with these roadblocks, both creatively and also work-wise? So your ability to deal with failure.
Should I answer it first?
Yes, please.
I think also my other practice is in performance, and it involves a lot of risk taking because it's performance is not about rehearsal and getting things to the perfection. We allow failure, and then therefore we allow the kind of risk taking and improvisation when things doesn't go our way. Similarly, for me, when I make my work, I want to push myself and try new things, challenge myself. So actually, I would really embrace failure as a big learning kind of experience and not be afraid of failure. As our great playwright Ko Pao Kun say, it's better to have a major failure than to have a mediocre success.
Yeah.
Nelson.
Yeah, so I remember what Professor Zhang told me during my time in Taiwan. He did say that if you are so focused on the end result, so whatever come along, meaning like maybe the failure, you will push away a lot of possibilities. So sometimes when we set up to do or make an artwork, we already like imagine how it's going to be when coming out of the kiln, perfect and everything. But if you have that kind of thoughts, right? Yeah, there will be a lot of possibility happening, but you don't accept. Yeah, so I think failure is one way of learning. Yeah.
Hans?
I think my answer to this question is the roadblocks that I encounter, both creative and work-wise, actually make it more exciting. If not, I mean, the whole creative process will be pretty monotonous. And for me, as with ceramics, there's so many limitations. For example, you cannot put a solid piece of clay into the kiln because apparently it would explode and all. But I feel that everyone has to experience this explosion once to understand that this is the limitations of this material. And of course, this has to be administered with like the studio technician who are there to mitigate the risk. If not, the kilns would wear out very quickly. But I feel that there's a fine balance between like really experiencing all failures firsthand apart rather than just listening and like, oh, okay, this is what this material can, this is the furthest this material can be pushed without questioning it. Yep.
Okay, let's end it there. I'd like to just summarize what we've all discussed today. I think I learned some things that are quite valuable. The first is that education is not just about the classroom. As Hans said, you have the onus to take responsibility over your education. And so you can learn from various experiences, from working with a community and exploring both the contemporary and traditional processes when you are abroad. From Nelson, he mentioned that, the experience of studying abroad also offers Singapore artists the opportunities to be more experimental with materials and to have the ability to work with large scale work. So to fulfill your dreams and work with the biggest artwork you can make. It doesn't matter whether you can bring them home but making them is the important thing. And that from Jason, I learned that, learning is an ongoing process for ceramic artists. The residencies and the opportunities to engage with other practitioners and communities can also enable growth in their own artistic practice, no matter what age. So thank you, gentlemen, for this very insightful panel talk. And I hope that the audience members learned a lot, because I definitely did. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you.